Hello friends, welcome to Akulmak Live. I'm Kanchan Verma, and in this series of Great Kings of India, we are discussing a great profile today, a great ruler, a great queen of India. We always see coins of Victoria as Empress of India, but somehow we have ignored our own queen who ruled for 2 decades around 1 century BC. So we'll be discussing this with our eminent guest today. Stick around to this episode till the end. You will get more information about this wonderful queen. Welcome back, friends. And today we are discussing a very important profile, a very important queen, a queen who left the mark. And to discuss this profile, this great king of India, we have a very eminent historian, Dr. Binta Paranjpe, who is a professor at Banaras Hindu University. She has done many research work and she is a very, very thorough, learned, thoroughly read history a teacher and professor. So without wasting any further time, I would like to welcome her. Welcome to the show, ma'am. How are you doing today?
Thank you.
Well, madam, which queen we are discussing, and I know you have hinted, and I would like to really hear from you. What is the name of the queen?
Oh, today I'm going to talk about one very interesting queen from ancient world. Her name is Naganika, but sometimes we also get her name as Nayanika. But that year no is same, so she is Naganika.
Well, who was this Naganika?
Mm. Um, See, in the region of Deccan, that is present Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, some parts of Karnataka, there was a mighty kingdom of Satavahanas. And these Satavahanas came to rule after the Mauryas, who were very prominent rulers from the north. So these Satavahanas started their rule sometimes around 2nd century BC, and Naganika is queen of one of the very important rulers of this dynasty, Satakarni first. And also her other identities from her parental side. Her father was a Maharathi, and his name is Tranayakayira. And we also get reference that he was from Amiya family. So we get a very good reference about who she was. And from both the sides, from her parental side and from her husband's side, she held a very important position.
Well, then, who were these Satvahana and who were these Rathis?
Yeah. Actually, this Maharathi word is very important. Sometimes some people try to say that instead of th, probably it was th. And then that Maharathi became Maharathi. And then Maharathi would be somebody who is good in warfare conducted through chariots, because Rath means a chariot. But that argument doesn't seem to be very convincing. The other identities, the provincial small kingdoms, fiefdoms we can call it, and they were called Rashtrikas. And Rashtrikas in the Prakrit language will be Rathikas, and the ones who are very powerful will become Maharathi. So Maharathis are small, powerful kings, and Satohanas, we have a little problem exactly about their origin, but maybe they started their rule as subordinates to the power from the north. So under the Kanvas, probably they started their rule, and but soon they became very prominent rulers of this region. So in fact, we can say that one of the first prominent kingdoms, independent, prominent local kingdom, was that of the Satavahanas.
Do we find similar kind of example in the ancient history when we talk about Naganika?
Yeah, of course, of course. We have, if you remember our earlier episode, we spoke about Prabhavati Gupta. And Prabhavati Gupta was a daughter from the Gupta family, Chandragupta II. And her mother was from the Naga family. So, very proudly, Prabhavati Gupta calls herself to be the daughter of a person coming from Naga lineage. And this Naganika also, she is feeling very proud in saying that she also had a lineage from the Nagas. So, such kind of alliances between some kingdoms who claim themselves to be the Naga kingdoms and the other ones who are maybe from the solar race, from the lunar race, or having their origin in some mythical beings. And they had their matrimonial alliances with the Nagas, and that must have helped them in establishing their kingdoms, making their kingdoms strong and powerful. Another example of such alliance is between Lichavis and the Guptas. So Chandragupta first married Kumara Devi, who was a princess from the Lichavi kingdom. So we have examples. Only thing is that this Naganika example is very old. What we are talking about, Prabhavati Gupta, is almost 600 years after her. So she definitely can be considered as the earliest example of having a very powerful matrimonial alliance between two important ruling houses, and Naganika as a princess from Maharathi family and getting an important position as the chief queen in the Satavahana family, the queen of Satakarni first. And
And
why
why?
I'm saying that she must have been chief queen, that is also interesting. Because in her inscriptions, she says that along with her husband, she performed many sacrifices. And those sacrifices are very important sacrifices to make a statement about unchallenged position of those kings, like Ashwamedha or Rajasvya. And she says that she was a part of that sacrifice. So unless she was a chief queen, she must not have got a chance to participate into those sacrificial rituals.
Well, how we really know about this great queen Naganika?
We are very lucky because we have her inscription, a very long inscription in one of the caves at Nanighat. We also have a statue label inscription, but unfortunately, because of the stone erosion, the statue is no more to be seen. But on the pedestal, we have these labeled inscriptions. So one of the inscriptions reads her name. Also, she is one of the earliest and rarest example of a queen issuing coins with her own name. So we get coins where Naganika's name is written. So we also have numismatic evidence for that, inscriptional evidence for her rule, and also this statue, as I told you, one of the rare specimens. So we have got different sources for that. And of course, for the rule of Satavahanas, we have got a lot of Puranic evidences also.
Well, you just now mentioned Nani Ghat. So, where it is?
Yeah, I mean, and the name is also very interesting. This is Ghat means mountain pass, the hilly pass which connects two lands intersected by the hilly region, hilly track. So this Nanighat Pass that joins the port towns from the western coast, like Thana, Chaul, Sopara, Kalyan. And you know that Thana and Kalyan are very important locations on the map of present Mumbai. So these are the port towns of ancient times. And on the land side, there were very important trading centers, very important cities. Like Nasik was there, Ter was there, Paichan was there. So this pass is connecting these two regions. So that is Nani Ghat. It is in Maharashtra. The Ghat side of it, I mean, the place where it connects to the trading centers on the mainland, that is at Junnar. And this Junnar is very close to Nasik.
Okay, well, what is the era or what is the date where Naganika ruled in ancient India?
Yeah, I mean, like many of the ancient rulers, we also have a little problem about placing her in exact chronological bracket. But more or less, it appears that she must have ruled in first century BC. We are already in the 22nd century, so 2100 years and 100 years before that.
So, where was her capital?
Though we don't have any very direct or concrete evidence for that, but it appears that it must have been in somewhere in the region of Nasik, because her portrait, as I told you, the statues which are there, or her most important inscription which is there, or the find spot of her coins are also nearby the region of Nasik, Junnar, and all that. So it appears that her capital must have been at Nasik,
Well,
on the banks of Godavari.
well, you mentioned that a queen who issued we find coins on her name, so that makes Naganika is very important personality when we discuss about the kings and queens. So, what is the special achievement of this wonderful profile, wonderful queen of India?
First and foremost, as I said, that she, when we know from the inscriptions that she participated in those rituals, and as I mentioned, that the rituals like Ashwamedha or Rajasuya definitely speak about the empire, the empirical position, like the one who was having the supreme lord position. And the queen is a part of that. So, in all probability, she must have been a part of that administration while her husband was alive. But more important is the fact that unfortunately she was widowed, and her sons were very young at that time. They were not of the age that any one of them could have taken the responsibility of the kingdom. So she ruled almost independently the throne of the Satavahanas after the death of her husband Satakarni first. And we get the names of her sons like Vedashri or Shakti Shri, but we don't see them as holding the position of the kings at that point of time. And then, as I told you, that if she issues the coins, then that means she must be having the full royal authority.
Well, she was the only queen who was doing the same kind of accepting all these responsibilities of a kingdom running in the ancient India.
No, that is not the case. We have seen Prabhavati Gupta already. We have seen a later queen, Rudramma. But what is most important is that, like earlier, during the time of Ashoka, we get references to two queens, Karuaki and Tisharakshita. But those references are still not completely corroborated. So we are taking them as legendary sources. So then, in that case, Naganika becomes the first queen to rule independently when her sons are young and her husband is no more. So, though we have examples, but Naganika is being the first one, obviously, is more important.
So, what is very remarkable? Let us discuss about her personality, and I'm sure her personality is quite remarkable. So, we'd like to know more about that.
Yeah. I think she must have been very assertive about her position and very conscious, because had not that been the case, we would not have seen the kind of inscriptions or the statues or the coins that we see. So definitely, she is not a person who, it so happened that she was the queen, so she took the responsibility. I don't think so. I think she was very much capable of it. And for running any state, for taking the responsibility of a kingdom, you need to be trained into the statecraft. And if her courtiers accepted her superior position as the ruling queen, I'm sure she must have been well trained into that. She appears to be a very spiritually oriented person because that could be because she was a widow, and it was a practice during ancient times that the widows would lead almost life of an ascetic, a person who has renounced most of the worldly pleasures. And in her inscription, we read that she became an ascetic. But very interestingly, the word that is used in the inscription is that she was house ascetic, like a person who would be discharging all the household duties, but will not be enjoying the luxuries or privileges or of being a householder. Now that also reflects a good amount of her own self-consciousness. Like she is not saying no to her duties, she's not saying no to her responsibilities, but at the same time she's following what should be followed as per the traditional values of family life in ancient India. And that for a ruler, I think, is very important, because a ruler sets an example in front of the subjects. So I think she must have become an example for other able women who should not consider themselves out of their regular possibility of discharging their duties because now they have become widows. So a wonderful balance, that what the traditional values expect of a ruler or of a woman, of a widow, and what the political institution expects from a person who takes the responsibility. So I think she was a wonderful blend of this. And another thing, why I'm saying that she appears to be a religious minded or spiritually oriented person, is that her inscriptions tell us that she was observing a lot of fasts, doing a lot of rituals, and performing small sacrifices and different modes of worship. And all that is very detailed account of that we get from her inscriptions. And of course, she must have been a very kind and responsible mother, because she was not assuming the royal title. She's saving it for her son to come to an age and take the responsibility.
Well, when we talk about enlightened despots, or when we talk about great kings, the foremost responsibility of any king or queen is to safeguard the boundaries. So did this wonderful queen fight any wars during that times?
We don't have any direct reference to any war, but I'm sure she must have faced some opposition, maybe from the neighboring states, because Satavahanas were engaged in a long struggle with the Kshatrapas coming from the Saurashtra side. And even if she had not fought wars, I'm sure she must have kept her army very apt and on its toes, because we don't see that she lost any part of her kingdom either. So she maintained it, and she must have maintained it with a good command over her army. So that again goes to her credit.
Well, if this is the case, then she is maintaining the boundary, she is safeguarding all the parameters of a good leader and a good warrior. And that is possible only with a diplomacy. So she did any diplomacy at that point of time?
As I said, that since the references to her career are very limited, we don't see any direct historical reliable source on that. But what I feel is that, first of all, she must have taken support, help of her father, who was a Maharathi. And it's not just a casual occurrence that her father is also in that portrait gallery, as I said, that there are statues of the members of the Satavahana family in Naneghat cave. Her father is also there. And as I said, that she was proud of being from the Naga lineage. So I think on side of diplomacy, she must have taken help of her father and maintained the kingdom.
So now, for what we can really credit her during her rule and after that, how we can remember her and her contribution?
Right. Now, as I said, that if you see the history of important rulers of India, she figures out very prominently as the ancient most woman who ruled, and we have absolutely reliable data on her. So she is not a legendary figure, she was a real historical figure. Secondly, as I said, that her widow did not stop her from discharging the duties. So that is another thing for which she must be remembered. And in fact, uh, we have a lot of references to the life of a widow in ancient India, and doesn't seem to be a very respectful life. It's life of full of hardships, and almost it's uh, she just would continue living after that, uh, trying to concentrate and on some religious or spiritual matters. But here we have a person who remains in the active life given to her duties. So that is another thing for which I think she should be remembered, number one. And number two, you know, very often we say that exceptions prove the rule. So definitely she's an exception. And but on the other side, I'll not say that she proves the rule that the life of the widows was also bad in ancient India. Probably some women got a chance to show their merit, and Naganika definitely appears to be one of them. I think that a tradition of the Satavahana rulers where they identify themselves with the name of their mothers. And that tradition we see after Naganika. So we have got names like Vasishthi Putra Pulumavi or Gautami Putra Satakarni. Now, Gautami or Vasishthi are definitely names of women, and Putra means son. So, son of Vasishthi, son of Gautami, son of Madhuri. Now, such kind of very proud names that these subsequent rulers they are identifying themselves with on the name of their mothers. I think Naganika's illustrious career could be one of the reasons for this tradition amongst the Satavahanas. Though we cannot say it for sure, obviously, unless we have got more concrete evidence to say that this is what happened. But nonetheless, we can look at it as one of the possibilities, and that is inspirational in case of Naganika.
Well, I'm sure I'm very much agreeable with the point that being a widow and then again at the top of the hierarchy and ruling the country and taking care of the children, it's quite a tremendously difficult work. So I would also want to hear about any special achievement of this wonderful Queen of India.
I think the very fact that she ruled almost for 2 decades, that itself is a big achievement. Because when we talk about the ancient period, and we don't see many widows having that possibility of taking such important positions. So that itself is an achievement. But as I said, that she promoted uh, not only, like, she appears to be a Vaishnava by her following, because her inscription starts with invocation to Vasudeva. Vasudeva is one of the names of Krishna, because Krishna was son of Vasudeva, so he got the name Vasudeva. But she also is showing her respect to other gods, and then the Vedic sacrifices. and the sacrifices which were more as per the Dharmashastras, Puranas. So a wide range of rituals that we can see her following. That probably is for making maximum subjects feel at home in her rule. Like anybody and everybody who has got different followings, they all would feel that their queen is with them. She also believes in the same godhood. So that is one. Secondly, when we say that she gave large scale donations, what kind of donations did she give? She gave cows, she gave clothes, even to some she gave elephants, to some she gave chariots. She also gave metal objects, maybe some vessels or something like that. Now, when you say that so many cows were donated, now obviously a priest who receives large number of cows, it is not for the consumption of milk to that person's household. It's a kind of support to the economy. And she must have given a thought to it. Also, when we talk that she has donated these metal objects, maybe pots and all that, it is a support and encouragement to the craftsmen. So I think all that can be seen, put together in a personality like that of Naganika, that how she was promoting all this. And these priests, obviously in ancient times, they used to be well versed in various kinds of knowledge systems, like Vedas, Brahma, various kinds of poetics, and of course philosophy to a large extent. But interestingly, she also promoted local culture, I think so, because her inscription is in Prakrit, and that is the local language. And subsequently, we see the Satavahanas promoted Prakrit to a large extent. So, though she respects the Vedic tradition, though she respects the priests, though she respects the culture which comes along with the Sanskrit language, but she is also supportive of the local language. That means to the people by and large, and not just the learned population of her times.
That,
So that again is a very
that shows that
thoughtful on part of a ruler.
right. So that shows that she is a people's queen, because she is interacting with the common people in their language and in their tradition. So that is awesome. Now, as a ruler, did she assume all royal titles?
I don't think so. We don't have any evidence to that. And that probably could be because of her being a widow. Or she was acting as a caretaker. She was not acting as a person who assumed the throne. That she didn't. So maybe that's why she didn't take royal titles.
Well, she ruled for 2 decades, as you mentioned. So now, had we given her a proper position and proper credit in history, in our own history?
Nowadays, of course, many people have started talking about her. But if we see for last 100 years or so, she's always mentioned as one of the rulers. Like nothing specific, nothing special about her. In fact, sometimes I feel that old Indologists have tried to give more emphasis on her spiritual activity, religious activity. They also tried to make statements about her position as a widow, she as a mother to the future kings. I think that was all not really giving her full credit to what she did.
What could be the
But nowadays, of course,
but what could
the change is there.
What could be the reason for this? Because she is such a great and profound ruler of India. Why it is not done earlier?
I think because, the texts like Puranas or the other chronicles, they still show a lot of uh, male dominated thought process, or broadly we can call it a patriarchal way of looking at the position of women. So maybe that is the reason. And mostly in the recent times also, like in last 50, 60 years, we are paying more attention to women in history. But earlier, women always used to be like appendices to main historical narrative. So I don't think that anywhere good amount of treatment is given to position of women or their careers. So Naganika could not be any other example than that. So, but one good thing is that now people have started definitely paying much more attention to these women rulers, and Naganika has been discussed. Like if you see on those countrywide classroom lectures or YouTube videos and all that, people have been talking about them.
Well, later then.
And even you, now you are doing it.
Yes.
You had this special episode on her in your series. So this is again an example that how we have started talking about the queens of ancient India.
Yes, it's very, very important to know our own great kings and queens of India, and it is high time that even the children should have knowledge from which culture, tradition we have come. Now, what is the importance of studying the profile, the career of Naganika in the history and history books?
Right. See, because as I said that what does she exactly mean when she says that she feels proud of being from the Naga lineage? Her father's position as a Maharathi. So what does this political alliance mean to the Satavahanas? Coin issued by this queen. The inscriptions, the language, the script which is used for the inscriptions. The donations, the kind of donations that she's been giving as fees and all that. So if we see different aspects of history, political history, economic history, cultural history, and now we are talking about the gender history also. So Naganika provides us food for thought in all these different sections of historical analysis.
Well, as usual, it is so interesting to discuss this wonderful profile, this great queen of India, as usual, and lovely. And the way you explained, it is awesome. I think all viewers will enjoy watching this and learning about this great queen of India. So we'll be meeting again with our next profile, next great king of India in our next episode. Till then, bye bye and take care.
Yeah.